raise an interesting point. Kids that are trying to navigate this new world often find themselves get into trouble, and a lot of that can stem from the cell phones. Young girls, for example, that are on cell phones and they're chatting in different types of platforms. Little do they know that there are predators on the other side of that phone.
Is that common? Have you been seeing that?
Enough that I think it's an issue.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are things that residents can do that can help you decrease the crime rate even more?
The most common crime in any community is going to be what they call larceny from auto. If I was to tell you, out of that 300 and some vehicles that had their cars broken into, what percentage of them do you think are unlocked?
I would say maybe 40.
No, it's more like 90%. And people will leave laptops, jewelry, guns, unsecured and unlocked vehicles, and they get stolen.
How much of a mental toll does your job take on you?
My wife tends to think that I don't have a normal response to a traumatic event. We had a commander, Dale Burnock, and we used to have a physical fitness test. Finished the race before Dale. Dale crossed the finish line, but he falls down in a way that was obvious to me that he was in trouble. He had passed away there. And I can remember they brought all of us in a room, and they said, is everybody okay? And so we all looked at each other, yeah, we're all fine, and that was the end of it. I'll tell you, Jaafar, if I had one of my biggest regrets, I never turned down overtime. I never turned down a special assignment, and I never turned down a promotion. And I had this goal early on in my career that one day I wanted to be the chief.
You think that all those eventually led to your detriment? One of the most important individuals in any city that you live in is the chief of police. He manages the police department. He makes sure that everyone's doing their job, and the police department is responsible for your safety. And there's so much that goes into their job. It's very difficult. You're about to listen in this conversation. It's a very difficult job. As the conversation continues, you're going to start realizing this is getting more difficult and more difficult and more difficult. So why is it worth it? But I'll let him do the talking. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't yet. I hope you're having a wonderful Ramadan. Like this episode if you enjoy what you hear. Share it with your friends. And with that being said, let's get the show started.
Welcome aboard Middle East Airlines.
والمتوجهة إلى طيران الشرق الأوسط يرحب مدينة تونس العربية.
When I start this off, usually I mean, you're wearing your uniform. The people that are watching or listening, they understand what Chief Issa Shahin does. But when you take off that uniform and you go home at night and you're getting ready for bed and you look in the mirror, who is that guy?
Unfortunately, he's still the police chief.
Mm-hmm.
So I never really take off the uniform, honestly. It's a 24-hour job. But it's really consuming, to be honest with you. But beyond that, obviously, I'm a father, I'm a son, a community member, obviously a servant to the people I work for in this community. But honestly, the uniform really never comes off.
What's one thing about your job that people would never understand until they live it?
It's just incredibly consuming, right? So, to do this job and to do it properly, I think it requires a lot of sacrifice. So I don't think you can really appreciate that level until you do the job.
Mm. You have to be in the weeds to understand how consuming it is?
Yes, so I'm just never off, right? I'm available to the community. I'm available 24 hours a day. I carry 2 phones that I have for many years. Obviously it's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. And so you're never really off. And to do this job correctly, to be a chief to the community, to be available to the men and women of the department, it requires a lot of sacrifice, right? And that means sacrifice with your family, time with your loved ones. And so to do it correctly, in my mind, it requires a whole lot of commitment and time.
Okay. That's for someone that's listening that might get Sunday off and they get to recharge on Sunday. And some people get 2 days off a week. But for you to even just start processing that there is no off.
There just isn't. I mean, I have the responsibility of 110,000 residents. We run a dispatch center to over 300,000 people across Southeast Michigan. We have several different communities in our dispatch center. I have 200 police officers, 100 civilian employees. And, there's always something happening. And there's always something that requires my attention. And so it's just, you're always involved. Like, my phone's going off right now.
Yeah.
It never ends.
Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit. And you started in 1998, okay? How popular was it to even go into law enforcement?
So, I mean, for Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, there was very few people on this job. When I started in 1998, Jaafar, there was 5 Arab Americans, maybe 6 that worked in the police department, and we had 200 officers. Our community was conservatively 50% Arab American. So when you think about that, less than 3% of the department really kind of reflected the community. I don't think it was a career that a lot of Arab Americans or Muslim Americans saw themselves drawn to. I think a lot of our parents, wanted to be doctors, lawyers, and engineers. I think their opinion of law enforcement, at least my father's, was, what policing was like back in Egypt.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a career that necessarily you wanted your kids to go into.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of parents, like immigrants that come here, are always kind of, they're worried about the feds coming in on the border. So, like in some weird way, the police department is kind of like an extension of that. Like he's a police officer, he might be the feds, and like the older generation don't know how to distinguish between that. So if you're coming to your parent and telling them, "Oh, I want to go into the police department," they're like, I lost my son. Like my son is gone to the feds.
Like, the relationship, I think, back home between communities and law enforcement is very different than it is here in the United States. And here it's a career, it's a profession. But to your point, yeah, back in '98, it wasn't something that a lot of Arab Americans or Muslim Americans were really drawn to.
Why were you drawn to it?
I was the oldest of 3 boys, and I've always kind of had this sense of right and wrong and justice. I've always kind of looked out for my younger brothers and sisters, and so I was that kid in high school that kind of would stand up for the less fortunate. Was always outspoken, even though maybe sometimes it didn't really get me very far. So I was just kind of drawn to it. I also had enjoyed the excitement of the job. It's different every day. I like being outside. The idea of going into an office every day and doing the same thing I found kind of monotonous. And I started early. As a young kid, I started when I was 13, 14 in an Explorer program out in Ann Arbor. And so it kind of introduced me to policing, and I knew that I was interested in it.
How cool. Is the conversation difficult with your parents, or do they kind of understand it right away?
Yeah, I can't say my parents were always very supportive. Right. So they always supported me in whatever I wanted to do. So I can't say there was an issue there. Now my father is incredibly proud, of his son. And so yeah, they always had their support.
You just mentioned your father. When we met 2 weeks ago, I'm not sure if you want to share the story about your father. Yeah. But I still think about that story that you told me until now, and I draw inspiration from it.
Yeah.
So, let alone you. So, if you're comfortable with it.
Sure, we can talk about it. So my father, he immigrated to this country in 1969 from Egypt. And he came to this country like many immigrants did back then. He had no family. He knew nobody. And like many immigrants back then, he got a job in the automotive industry at Ford Motor Company. And he was working in this country literally 2 weeks. And he lost his left arm, a good portion of his left arm in the factory. And so he worked at a stamping plant where they cut metal or sheets of metal. You see the big rolls of steel on the back of trucks?
Yeah.
And so they turn them into doors and hoods and what have you. And so the foreman put him on a machine that was designed for one person, but they put 2 people on it. And when he was adjusting the metal, the other employee hit the button and he lost his arm. Can you imagine? You speak limited English, you have no family here, and now you've just lost your arm in the country that's supposed to provide you, milk and honey, right? And so for me, my father worked another 38 years in the factory, provided for a family of 5, was able to raise all of us. We all went to college. We all, alhamdulillah, we all became successful and did good things in life. But whenever I had a challenge in my career or I faced a challenge that I thought was difficult, I'd always reflect on my father and gain strength from that experience and tell myself that what I'm facing right now is nothing that pales in comparison with what my dad dealt with. And so it always kind of was a source of strength for me.
Sometimes it's odd that like you'd be going through something, but then when you look at someone else and what they're going through, you're going to be like, oh wait, I actually have it way easier. And it's like the circle effect. And now people, like, we can be having this conversation, and if I think about problems that I personally have, and then you tell me about the problems, I mean, like at the bare minimum, I can say, and this is putting it very simple, that I have a day off at the end of the week.
Yeah.
Police chief never gets that day off. It's like you draw this fuel from someone else's hardship.
Sure.
What about the early days in the police force? You mentioned that there weren't many Arab Americans in there. So did you find it kind of difficult to assimilate into the workforce, or was it kind of natural that happened?
Look, it was a welcoming place many times, but oftentimes I found myself facing obstacles that, were difficult as well. It wasn't always, there's a lot of great people, so I don't want to paint this picture. There's a lot of great people, a lot of people that mentored me. There were a lot of phenomenal police officers that worked really hard, but there was a lot of experiences as well that were challenges. And so I can tell you, for me, becoming the chief of police is really a full circle moment for me, right? So I started in 1998. We had 5 Arab Americans on the department. To now be able to be the chief of police and have over 45 Arab Americans that work in the police department. I've hired a number of police officers in the last 3 years that I've been chief. The overwhelming majority of them have been people from our community that understand our community, speak our language, and are better able to serve our community. For me, it's critically important, Jaafar, that a police department is a mirror reflection of the community you serve. That includes not just Arab Americans, but women, African Americans, Hispanic, really the rainbow. Because the reality is when you have a police department that reflects the community it serves, you're going to have better outcomes. They're going to be able to better understand the community. You have, just simply put, you have better outcomes when you have people that are part of the community that understand it. So I'm very proud of that fact. The diverse workforce that we have makes us better, stronger, and better able to serve our community. So I'm extremely proud of that. That's for me, being able to be the chief of police and foster that environment. It kind of builds on itself. I have colleagues in other departments that'll remark at the fact that we're a fully staffed police department. I mean, there's very few police departments that can say that. We're either the 4th or 5th largest municipal police department in the state of Michigan. And to be able to be fully staffed is really remarkable. Most police departments are having an extremely hard time recruiting and retaining officers.
Why is that?
I think a lot of people don't want to do this work anymore, right? I think being a police officer, it's never been ever hard. It's much harder now than it's ever been before. There's so much oversight and criticism of law enforcement. So I don't think it's a career path that a lot of people are drawn to anymore. So, it makes it that much harder. And then when you're talking about, trying to recruit and retain diverse officers, it's just a challenge. But we're doing a pretty good job here in our city, and I'm proud of that. The reality is, for me, when you have a department that that is inviting, that is accepting, recruiting diverse officers becomes much easier. We literally today I swore in a Lebanese American officer from New York City, who saw what we're doing in Dearborn, wants to come to move his family to Dearborn, and so I literally field phone calls from Muslim and Arab American officers from across the country that are drawn to Dearborn for the community that we have, the department that we have. When they see officers that look like themselves, then they recognize that it's a welcoming place that they want to work. So I'm very proud of that. And it's a reflection far more than just me, right? It's the men and women that make up the department.
Right.
I'm just one person. And so I'm very fortunate and blessed that I get to lead such an amazing organization of men and women.
But you can relate with that because you were that individual that wanted to see people that look like him in the department.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I know what it was like to kind of be on the outside looking in. I could tell you a number of stories that I'd rather not share, but there were a lot of things that happened during the course of my career that were challenges that I faced that, to put it simply, Jaafar, I want to be able to create the police department that I wish I had been able to work for when I was hired. Mm. That's kind of my guiding light, right?
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I'm creating the department that I wish I had worked for.
Now, I don't want you to get into the stories if you said you didn't want to mention them, but were they more of like on the verbal side, or is someone that just tells you to do something that maybe you didn't want to do, but it's just the nature of work? Like, what kind of hardship was it?
There was just a lot of things during the course of my career that I faced that I thought were insensitive, or there were just difficulties, man, challenges that I shouldn't have had to dealt with when I was coming up through my career.
I can go on and on and on about the health benefits that people try to teach and inform you about during the month of Ramadan. But for me, learning and implementing what you should do is one thing, but tracking it is also a very important thing. Like, how are you going to track your sleep? And if you got sufficient enough sleep when your sleeping schedule is all over the place? That's why you need a device that is on your body 24/7 that'll be able to catch these small things. What does even a step further than that is it takes into consideration that you're observing Ramadan. I'm going to show you the toggle right here next to me. As long as this is turned on your app WHOOP knows to monitor your activity according to your observance of Ramadan. And because you listen to Not From Here, WHOOP actually wants to give you a month for free. All you got to do is go to join.whoop.com or hit the link in the description below. You get a month for free. Try it out. See how much it elevates your lifestyle health-wise. And I'm pretty sure that you will never take it off. And now, back to the episode. One very important thing that happened not long after you joined the police force was 9/11.
Yeah.
And I wonder, how was that as first, you're still in that phase where there isn't too many Arab American police officers, but now I remember Abdullah put it in a very nice way that when they were younger, they used to leave their back doors open because that's how safe they felt in Dearborn. And then there was this changing point where now there's a bullseye on each one of everyone's back. So how did that translate into like the police department or law enforcement at that time?
You know, here's why it's critically important to have Arab Americans or just a diverse workforce, because you're able to bring context and perspective to situations that are being misunderstood. You know, oftentimes I think non-Arab Americans or non-Muslim Americans perceive conduct on behalf of a Muslim American as being suspicious or inappropriate, but oftentimes it's just normal behavior. So I think being able to be in that space, being able to interpret and bring context to situations is really important. You know, during 9/11, I can remember the FBI had a list of folks that they wanted to interview. And, you know, so having Arab Americans that were able to kind of like navigate that and facilitate those conversations, I think it was critically important. Otherwise, they would have never happened. You know, they were casting a very wide net back then to try to, you know, in their minds protect, you know, the homeland. And if you don't have people that understand that culture, understand the religion, understand the language, and it creates a lot of problems. So I know that they leaned on the handful of officers that were there to help kind of navigate that. And thank God there was officers that we had that speak Arabic much better than I do, because we would have been in big trouble. But
is that hard to find, officers that speak Arabic?
Nowadays, we have a large number of Arab American officers that can translate. But back then, there was only just a few of us. You know, like Abe Dabaja. I'm trying to remember who else. There was only there was 5 of us on the job, and only a handful of us could read and write and speak Arabic. Right? Like أنا بتحكي عربي نص نص, right? But there's people that do it much better than me.
Was it so? To stay on the 9/11 point,
Yeah.
Were there people that like you actively knew that your people had a bullseye on their backs? Did the work change? Like, okay, we have to be more attentive. Like, there's some people that might be crazy that are going to try to do something, that might try to do something. Like, did the work change from that perspective?
I mean, fortunately, dealing with those types of things are not a local level police, you know, issue. They're handled by the FBI and the federal government. So on a local level, we very rarely find ourselves involved in that kind of monitoring of extremist behavior. But what I'll mean is, for example, you might find just a devout Muslim who is just very religious and devout in his faith. And as a Muslim American, I can recognize that, and I don't see anything in that might be a threat in any kind of way. But I think back then they were so hypersensitive to, you know, they were so concerned, right, about terrorism that they misinterpreted things all the time that necessarily were not a threat to the United States or our government. And so to have Muslim Americans in that space to be able to kind of highlight that this is not a threat, there's not something here you need to be concerned with, I think is important.
What's one thing that you've learned about our community throughout your job? One thing that stands out to you?
It's just, Dearborn is such a special place, right? There's some of the most welcoming, considerate, kind, just a phenomenal. I feel blessed that I've had the opportunity to work here for 27 years. Dearborn's really a special place. Just very welcoming, kind, generous people that will give you the shirt off their back. I could have been the police anywhere, and so I'm very grateful that this is where I found my career. That's where I met my wife, where I raised my kids. You know, for me, you know, alhamdulillah, it was a blessing to be able to come here and be the police officer, and then ultimately, it's one of the greatest privileges is being the chief and being able to lead this organization.
There obviously many crimes / issues that happen in any city.
Sure.
We kind of attach culture and religion to a lot of the issues that we're going through. For example, substance use. It's not just it's not detrimental to our health only, but also has a religious or cultural aspect where it's like haram, right? And the previous episode on this Monday, I had a conversation with Ali Sayed.
I saw some of that.
Yeah, and the reactions that came about that was we really need to talk more about this issue. And Ali will get them to the rehab facilities, or a parent will call them like, hey, I think my son is using. You're on site, you probably picked up a person that you might have saved a person, applied Narcan, saved his life, or got there a little too late where the person was already gone, or discovered it too late. What's the state of that in our city?
So, well, let me frame the question a little differently, right?
Okay.
So, drug and substance abuse affects every community across this country. I think what I've seen over the course of my career, especially from a law enforcement perspective, is we've recognized that you're not going to be able to arrest your way out of this problem, right? And so when I was early on in my career and I was on various task forces, I focused a lot of my energy as a young sergeant, focused on getting drug dealers, drug users, and we were proficient at trying to find dope houses to close them down. But the reality is that, again, that's not going to solve your issue. And so I think shortly before I became the chief of police, we instituted a program where we have, in a partnership with Access, we have a substance abuse counselor that's embedded in the police department. We were actually one of the first departments in the state of Michigan to institute this program, and I fashioned it after a program out east and out near the Boston area. So here's what happens in the city of Dearborn. If you should have an overdose, a non-fatal overdose, we'll respond to the scene of that overdose sometimes that next day, or to the hospital or the hotel, and we have a drug counselor on scene that responds with us. And really it's an opportunity to get people and try to get them enrolled into a drug treatment program. Because the police department's uniquely positioned to be able to facilitate that, because we're at the scenes of all the overdoses. Nobody else is. Well, we are, so we have that information. So we were able to partner with someone in that space through Access to be able to respond to that home to try to get people into treatment. Now, sometimes people aren't interested, and I understand that, and it's only going to work if they want to get help. But we even use that as an opportunity to train on how to use Narcan. We'll provide Narcan to the family members or that person. And we'll even follow up later, a month or two later, to check on them to see if they may be interested in treatment at that point. But I guess my point is we've gone from trying to arrest our way out of this problem to realizing that it's really more of a holistic approach where it takes the entire community to try to get people help. I'm very happy and proud of the work that Access is doing. They're now building a substance abuse facility on the east end of our city that will be available to not just our residents, but everybody in the community. But the reality is you're not going to be able to arrest your way out of this issue. And any police chief or police officer that thinks you are is misguided.
Even when you used to close down dope houses, that doesn't solve, the way I'm thinking about it is these are the places that are selling and you close down these places. It's not as simple as that.
No, because 10 more are going to pop up. I mean, it's supply and demand. But I don't want to suggest that you shouldn't be aggressive on closing down dope houses or drug dealers. We very much are. But it's going to be it takes more than that. People need to get into treatment. They need to get help. I'll give you an example. When I was a young officer in charge of a task force and I wanted to develop informants, I used to actually go to the scene of overdoses and I'd take my business card and I'd give it to the person that's suffering an overdose. And I'd say, if you want to do something about this, let me know, right? So they could provide us information. They would recover from that overdose event. They might be off of the pills for a week or two. Drug dealers would call them and they would say, hey, I haven't seen you in 2 weeks. Where have you been? I've got a new shipment. I mean, it's insidious, right? Like they don't care about these people. They just want to sell their product. And so some of these people that we're trying to recover would provide us information to try to help us close down dope houses. But I guess it's simply put, Jaafar, as long as there's people that want something, there's going to be somebody to provide it.
What are some of the most disturbing stories that you've come across when it came to this issue
Of drug use?
Yeah.
I mean, I could share a whole bunch of terrible stories. I'll just tell you that when somebody's so dependent on drugs that they'll steal from their families, you know, they'll hurt their own families for drugs. They'll do just about anything. So let your imagine run wild. Let your, let it. What am I?
Imagination run wild.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Cut that part out, will you, Jaafar?
Really?
Yeah. I mean, people will do terrible things to get drugs. I mean, imagine all the things that people will do for narcotics or for, you know. So
I think we don't know.
I've seen the worst in people.
Because every house feels like it's far away from them, is the general consensus.
Yeah, but
so
I think I saw Ali even during his episode with you say that everybody knows somebody that has suffered a substance abuse issue.
Yeah.
So that, you know, it affects all races, all religions, all socioeconomic classes. Everyone's affected by it.
what are we supposed to do?
You know, a lot of times substance abuse issues are driven by other issues as well, right? So while it can affect anybody, right, a lot of times it can be driven by mental health issues, other issues within a home. And so there's my answer to you, if you're a parent, right, is be very observant of your kids, be very engaged. You know, I think we all get caught up in our jobs and our lives. I mean, I know how much I have. Thank God I've married a wonderful woman that I don't deserve. And I just say that because my wife is just an angel, and she's done such an amazing job with our kids. Because of my job, I haven't always been as engaged as I want to be. But you need to be engaged as a parent, right? A mother and a father need to know what their kids are up to, where they're at, who their friends are. You know, don't leave prescription pills in your medicine cabinet when they're done, right? Throw them out. Don't leave them available. But always be a support system to your kids, right? Because I think if a lot of times for a lot of kids, you know, idle hands can get you in a lot of trouble, right? When you're not busy doing things, or you're engaged, or you're ignored, I think you can find yourselves in a lot of deep trouble.
Right.
Yeah. I don't have an easy fix, Jaafar. I wish I could tell or give parents a guidebook to keep them out of having to deal with this, but it even affects the very best parents.
Yeah.
So being engaged and being observant is it's incredibly important.
Other than drug use, what is another dangerous thing that we are very vulnerable to?
So look, I don't have to tell anyone in this city, right? Traffic safety is a top priority for everybody in this community. You know, the number one leading cause of death among young adults is injuries and traffic crashes. So it's important that you are very involved with your kids when it comes to traffic safety. So I have two newly minted drivers. I have a 19 and 20-year-old at home, and then I have a 16-year-old that's going to be in driver's ed here in May. So I'm keenly aware of the dangers of letting your kids out there go and drive. So for example, if my phone rings right now, Jaafar, and it's one of my kids, I'm going to answer, especially if they're behind the wheel, because I'm that concerned about their safety when they're out there driving. Talk to your kids about the dangers of reckless driving. Don't buy your kids these muscle cars. Like my son Yusuf, Jaafar, there's no other car he would want more than a big muscle car that goes fast. But I'm far more concerned about crash ratings than I am about horsepower, right? So I'm not going to buy my son that car that is not going to keep him safe, that he might get in trouble with. Know where your kids are going, right? You know, when you have a young adult that's out late at night, you know, on a weekday, not much good is going to come of that, especially if they're not going or coming from work or with purpose. But if they're out late at night without a purpose, not much good is going to come out of that. There's apps out there. I encourage parents to use some of the technology that's available to you. I'm a big proponent of Life 360. If you're familiar with that app, you can put it on your phone and your kids' phones, and so you know where they're going and how fast they're traveling. If you want to pay for the app, if they go above the speed limit, you'll get an alert. If they brake too hard or they get involved in a crash or they accelerate too fast, you'll get an alert. Now, some people might say that's just a little overboard, right? I don't think so. It's not that I take that information and, you know, give my kids a hard time every time they go over it. But when they do go too fast, you may have a conversation about it, right? I want them to understand that I'm paying attention, I'm worried about their safety, and I want them to understand the dangers of it, because the reality is kids think they're invincible, you know, and so quite recently, we've seen a lot of tragic crashes involving kids from our community, and it's painful. It's painful for the community. It's extremely painful that I can't imagine for those families. But you got to be careful. You got to always kind of be engaged and watching what your kids are doing.
And kids really look at their parents and think, what do they know? You know, like, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. You
know, they don't look at their parents like, oh, like, obviously some kids do look at their parents like, oh, okay, they care. Maybe I should, but you know, if your parent doesn't even know how to speak English that well, and they try to say it in the Arabic that you don't even know, like you don't even understand that well, you're gonna be like, all right, I'm just gonna get back in my car and go.
You raise a kind of an interesting point. You know, I think what happens, and especially here in Dearborn, you have a lot of newly immigrated families that come to this country, and their parents, you know, have limited experience with the culture or how much danger is in a cell phone, right? And so, you know, they're busy just trying to work and make ends meet. And so their kids that are trying to navigate this new world often find themselves and they can get in over their head or get into trouble. And a lot of that can stem from the cell phone, right? And so I've seen a lot of young kids, young girls, for example, that are on cell phones and they're chatting in different types of platforms with people that they think are other teenagers. Little do they know that, you know, they're predators on the other side of that phone. And so, you know, I'll give you an example. You would never think about dropping your 12-year-old daughter at somebody's house that they don't know and leaving them there and driving away, would you?
No.
But when they're chatting on a phone, they're chatting with a whole bunch of strangers, and you have no idea who they're communicating with. And, you know, young girls and young adults, young boys as well, are vulnerable. And so, again, parents need to be very mindful of the time and what your kids are doing on their phones, what they're sharing, the images that they're sending, and who they're communicating with, because oftentimes they can be communicating with somebody that is not who they say they are.
Is that common? Have you been seeing that?
Enough that I think it's an issue and it's a concern. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's been a number of instances where young girls have communicated with who they think are other teenagers and have met up with folks that they think are teenagers only to find out that they're full-grown adult men. And yeah, you have to be very mindful and concerned with what your kids are out there doing.
And what's the call that you get to the station?
So oftentimes they don't know where their daughter is at. They can't find them, right? They are not where they're supposed to be. And so then we are able to oftentimes track down these kids and find out, you know, it happens enough that it's a concern. You need to be mindful of who your kids are communicating with and who they're talking with in these various chat groups, and it happens.
It almost seems like parenting is difficult as it is, but you add this new layer of deep, dark stuff where there's just sick people out.
Yes.
And that don't care, right? Just like the people who sell drugs, they don't care physically about your well-being. As long as they can sell you enough for you to come again, they're going to keep doing that.
You know, even after 27 years of law enforcement, I still think the majority of people are good, decent people, which I think a lot of cops that have been doing it as long as I have might not necessarily have that lens. But there are a lot of still depraved people out there that mean harm, to do harm to you and others. And so, you know, we do our best to try to safeguard the community. But the reality is that parents and people need to be mindful of a lot of this behavior. Otherwise, they can get themselves in trouble.
Really? You think?
I think majority of people are good.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
You know, it was a conversation that we had with one of my friends not too long ago. And he asked, like, do you think there's more, like, do you think it's easier to find a good person, or is it to find like a bad person out in the world?
I mean, don't get me wrong, Jaafar. When somebody's really nice to me, I'm always a little suspicious, like, why they're so nice, maybe because of my career. But no, the majority of people are good people out there.
I had the same perspective. I actually thought that, like, for the most part, people intend good. Yeah. You know, they mess up and it'll come out as bad, and it depends how you're seeing it in that moment. You don't really know their picture.
I've always had this question as a police officer. I've always wondered, do I have a better sense of reality than the average person that's not a cop, or do I have a jilted sense of reality because of the things that I've seen and come across? I've always wondered that, right? Because I see the very worst in people and the worst behavior, and I wonder if that over time takes its toll on you. You're like, man, you know, I have a more accurate representation of reality, or is my sense of reality skewed because of all the kind of pain and sorrow that I've seen over the course of my life?
Because when you average it out, people, like, you tend to get calls to the police station, maybe crimes. So you're seeing the bad extreme
all day long.
Yeah, right. So that may.
But do I have a better sense of reality because I see all of those things and ignorance is bliss? I just walk around like, oh, everybody's great and nice, because you don't realize how much, you know, ugliness is there. You know.
Yeah.
I wonder.
That's a very nice question, actually.
I think ignorance is bliss, Jaafar.
Yeah. But I mean, some of the things that you pick up in your job is you can get kind of a good read on a person, you know? Like I'm pretty sure now when you when the suspect comes in, you most of the times can get a good read on him. Like, is he telling the truth? You start picking up on some things. You probably have a few tricks up your sleeve, as they say. No?
Yeah, no, there are a few tricks, but ultimately I'd still take my wife into any interrogation before I took another cop. My wife should have worked for the CIA. Well, she's Palestinian, right? So
Yeah.
she has an upper hand already. But yeah, there are a few tricks. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
When I used to pull people over and they don't have their driver's license on them or something, you go, hey, what's your name? If I ask you what your name is, what are you going to say?
Jaafar.
Okay. But if I ask you what your name is and you go, my name? That right there, I know you're about to lie. So if I ask you, like, Jaafar, what's your birthday? And you're going to immediately
My
tell me,
birthday?
yeah, that's a lie. I know a lie's about to come out.
Yeah.
So there are a few tells like that would, so if you're trying to conceal your identity, never, you know what, I'm not going to give away trade secrets here. But yeah, there are a few tells. So yeah, I'd agree with that.
How much of a mental toll does your job take on you?
You know, I'm going to talk in general just about police officers in general.
You do represent them.
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
course.
So yeah, it takes an immense amount of toll, right? So you see trauma and misfortune every day around the clock for 25 plus years. And so without a doubt, it takes a toll on officers. And I've heard it described, it's not that one incident, right? For some people it is. You can have a very traumatic incident and it can take a chunk of you with it. But for a lot of us, it's a death by 1,000 cuts, right? So it's the toll of everyday trauma and accidents and mayhem and misfortune and chaos. And so, yeah, I'll give you an example just for myself and for most cops that have been doing this a while. My wife tends to think that I don't have a normal response to a traumatic event, right? When there's something really bad happening, most people will have a visceral response or they'll, get emotional. Most cops aren't going to get that emotional if they've been doing this for any length of time because you're just used to that. Like your baseline is way up here because of what you've dealt with for so many years. And so, you can have a very flat affect when something, emotional is happening because for you, you're kind of used to it over time. And so for a lot of cops, and that's another thing. So over the course of my career, we've seen a huge transformation when it comes to health and wellness for police officers because I think there's a lot more awareness surrounding the effects of this job and what it does for you. And so, when I came up through my career, there was very little kind of reflection after a critical incident for a shooting or if an officer was to have died or gotten hurt. There wasn't a lot of awareness or talk. We didn't talk about it much. And so now we have a peer-to-peer team. And so we have police officers within the organization that are special. And this was organic. It was the officers themselves recognizing that there was a need for this. But we have officers that are specially trained and to recognize, when another officer's not doing well and to be there, a peer support for that officer. We have a health and wellness officer that we recently just minted in the organization whose focus is to try to maintain and be mindful of the health and wellness of our other officers. He's actually getting his master's in social work, and he's one of our police officers, and he has a passion for it. There's been a lot of work in that area to try to improve the health and wellness of officers so that, look, my goal for every police officer that works in the Dearborn Police Department is that they can finish their fruitful career and retire in good physical health and mental health, and along the way, help safeguard this community, help people, help keep them safe. But ultimately, my goal is to get each and every one of these officers to their retirement in one piece.
That's harsh to say.
Well, yeah, it takes a toll on you, and so I want to see every officer be able to retire in good health, physical and mental, and enjoy, what life he has left. And along the way serve this community.
But that's even like saying that you used to have team members pass away and not talk about it. Like that's your partner, that hurts.
Yeah, we had a commander, Dale Burnock. Commander Burnock was such a nice guy. And we used to have a physical fitness test. We used to, we would have to do push-ups and we'd do a 1.5 mile run and sit-ups, and depending on your performance, you would get days off. And Dale Burnock, we were at that physical fitness test together, and I was generally one of the slower folks. I know that might come as a surprise to you, but at the end of the race, I should have when I looked at the group, I'm like, I'll probably come in near last. But I had finished the race before Dale. And so I'm sitting there at the finish line, and I watch Dale cross the finish line, and Dale crosses the finish line, but he falls down in a way that he didn't brace his fall, right? The way that he fell, it was obvious to me that he was in trouble. And so myself and other officers there, administered CPR to try to save Dale's life, but he had passed away there. I think he had an aneurysm. Don't hold me to it, but he had some type of heart attack or an event, and he passed away there at that event. And I can remember they brought all of us in a room after he had passed away that were there, trying to do CPR on him, and they said, "Is everybody okay?" And so we all looked at each other. Yeah, we're all fine, and that was the end of it. And so that was probably over 20 years ago now. So the way that we respond, the way that we treat officers when those types of things happen is much different then. But that's what it was like back then.
You just have to continue throughout your day, throughout your shift.
Yeah, but that's also, I've seen so much heroism too over my 27 years, Jaafar. I've watched officers that have been at fatal scenes or shootings, and you have to continue answering runs. There's only so many of us, and those calls for service keep coming in. And so, I've seen. So one of the greatest things about being a police officer is to see the humanity in the other people you work with, and to see the way that they, take care and protect each other, and the way that they serve this community. And even when something traumatic like that happens, when there's an officer-involved shooting or something serious, there's people still calling the police because their car got broken into. There's people that still need help. There's people that are still involved in accidents. And so they will compartmentalize that incident, that trauma, and continue to work and do their jobs because they're professionals. And so for me, to be able to witness that and be part of that has been, I've taken a lot. It means something to me to wear this uniform and be able to serve this community like that. I take a lot of pride in that.
I can imagine that we were talking about the mental toll. Like, you don't even have time to process. You're on the job 24/7.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't stop and just be like, what just happened right there? Like, did I really actually lose one of a very good friend right now?
I remember there was an incident. I was a new sergeant, and there was an incident at Henry Ford College where an individual had taken an infatuation with a student, and ended up taking a shotgun to campus and ended up killing that student and killing himself. But I remember going down the hallway with other officers responding to that scene. We had known that there had been a shooting, and as we're going down the hallway, myself and a handful of officers, the individual shoots and kills himself. And I can just remember that after that incident, later that same day, I'm in the post office, mailing a letter, and I'm standing in the post office, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I literally just dealt with this very traumatic event, and all these people are going about their day as if everything's normal, and so am I at this point. I'm just mailing a letter. So yeah, that's the nature of police work. It's a tough, tolling job. So when you ask me, why people have a hard time coming to this career, there's not a lot of people that want to sign up for that kind of work. And then on top of it, oftentimes now we're maligned in the media. No matter what we do, we're never doing something right.
Defund the police.
Yeah, defund the police. When something like I hire 19 and 20-year-olds, okay, that are passionate about serving this community, and then they respond to chaotic, crazy events, and when the outcomes aren't what we expect, who do we blame? We blame the police. Why didn't they do a better job? Why did they have to do that? Why couldn't they have done something different?
Yeah.
There's no other profession, Jaafar, where you can watch a YouTube video and all of a sudden now you're an expert on how to be the police. Like, I wouldn't watch a YouTube video and think I could do open heart surgery.
Right.
But everybody can watch a YouTube video and now all of a sudden they're experts in law enforcement and how to navigate these situations. So it's a really tough job. And so, when you talk about the trauma, you talk about the expectations, the oversight, the accountability, and if you make it in one piece, right, you get to enjoy potentially a pension, but there's no health care anymore for, police officers. Very few departments have retiree health care. And so, you're never going to be rich, right? You'll be able to hopefully make a decent living, be middle income.
At best.
At best. So, there's not a lot of people that want to do that. It's a tough job.
During the month of Ramadan, one of the most purchased items are drinks, because obviously you need your post-iftar beverage. Well, if you live in America, you're about to see Palestine Cola more and more and more. it's going to be available in the grocery stores every time you go grab groceries, or the gas stations for a quick run after iftar. Every time you see this, I want you to think of one thing. Other than it tastes really, really good and it really doesn't compromise on the taste of actual cola, but 100% of the proceeds of Palestine drinks go directly to the people in need in Palestine. And that's a big deal. We're in the month of giving. You're already spending a lot of money on food. So this will make you feel a little bit better about your spending. And now, back to the episode.
One of the things that's important to me as chief is that I can do my best to support the men and women of the department. You know, it's difficult too, right? Because you're the chief of police. And sometimes you need to redirect officers. Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes, you know, because we're human beings, right? And so it's tough to be able to redirect these officers, but still let them know that you love them and support them and have their back no matter what. It's a very difficult kind of situation. There's no other profession, Jaafar, where you go to work, and if you make a mistake, you know, well, maybe you're going to get disciplined. You might get a reprimand. You might get a day off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I still love you, and we support you, and we're family, which is true. That's my reality. But sometimes you need to redirect these kids, because I told you my 2 goals are, right? They retire in one piece, good mental health, good physical health, and they help people along the way. Well, sometimes the things that they do can get in the way of that. And so it's my job to kind of say, hey, guys, you need to be careful here.
Yeah, you almost have to be that father figure, like just like your son, you would
100%.
sit down and be like, hey, you have to sit in your room today.
100%.
And it's kind of the same way. But I was curious to ask, when those things used to happen, did you think it was normal to continue like regular for the rest of the day?
It's just what was expected back then.
So like everyone was in the room was like, hey, everyone okay? Yeah, we're okay. Like, did you in the moment actually feel like, oh, this is okay? But they'll just drop it.
That's a good question. I can just tell you, like, you compartmentalize, right? Like, I would imagine that people in battle, right? You know, people that are in wars. And I don't want to make that correlation, but you can't just stop. The job doesn't allow you to, right? So you've just dealt with this traumatic event, but I have officers and there's people that still need the police. So, you know, if it's really traumatic and they didn't look like they were okay, or they said they needed help, we would obviously take them out of the fight so that they could, you know, kind of recover. But, you know, you think a lot of cops back in the day go, hey, I'm not feeling well, I need some help?
No. Especially you're surrounded by alpha men all the time, you know?
Right.
Big, strong guys. No one's going to be like, I'm like, that got to me. Like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. No, you didn't talk about it. There's been a change, though. So, I mean, I'm talking about 20 years ago.
Right.
Nowadays, we recognize that, you know, the trauma of that event, and we'll call officers in off the road or overtime if we need to, because, you know, we need to take people and let them go home or go talk to professionals. Now, if it's if officers respond to, let's say, the drowning of a baby or a child or something like that, we'll mandate that they go to EAP to talk to somebody before they come back.
What's EAP?
Employee Assistance Referral Program, right? So, you know, they'll go talk to a professional to make sure they're okay. There's certain jobs that require, you know, that once a year you go and you talk to a professional. You know, we had officers on task forces that deal with a lot of, you know, child porn and things like that. We'll send those officers to because if you can only imagine, that's a whole nother level of trauma that you're dealing with. So those officers have to check in and make sure that they're doing okay. But
you see a lot.
Police officers see a lot. It's a tough job.
What's the most traumatic that you've personally seen? Something that shook you emotionally?
I mean, over 27 years, Jaafar, I've seen a lot, man.
But there is not one situation where you remember, like, this really shook me to my core. Like, this was very disturbing.
Yeah, there's a lot out there, but I'd rather not talk about it.
Okay.
I'm not going to sensationalize it. I'll just tell you, Jaafar, that it's a tough job, and there's a lot of trauma that a lot of officers see. And so when you see a police officer, thank him for his service, because he's been through a lot.
What did you make of the Defund the Police movement when it was, especially after Black Lives Matter, every time an interaction would happen to the police, every bad interaction that would happen with the police would make it online. It would be a viral moment. And now you start hearing chatter of, okay, defund the police, take away their privileges, all this stuff. How do you respond internally as a police department?
So look, I take a great deal of pride in wearing this uniform. When I started as a 24-year-old kid, I wasn't a kid, but when I was 24 years old, I put on this uniform. It filled me with a sense of pride to be able to represent this organization and what it meant. And so for me, it's always about upholding the highest standards of professionalism, of excellence, of, it's actually quite simple. You ever hear, the golden rule? Treat people the way that you would want to be treated. My expectation is that when our officers are dealing with folks, that they're treating the person as if it was their own sister or their own family member. But when you speak specifically to the Black Lives Matter movement or the Defund the Police movement, I understand people's frustration when they see what the images that they see out in the media, but they need to know that 99% of all the police officers feel the same way as well. When I see that type of behavior or misconduct, it turns my stomach the same way. And so you find yourself as disgusted as the community might be as well, but yet you, at the same time, even though you agree with them, you're getting attacked for it as well. It's really a tough spot to be in. Like oftentimes when I've been around demonstrators or protesters, I almost want to say, hey man, I understand your position, right? But that doesn't represent my values. It doesn't represent the policing or what I've witnessed or seen over the course of my career. And so oftentimes, you paint such a broad brush of all of law enforcement because of the actions of just a few. And it's really unfortunate because that's nothing that I want to be held accountable. That's not the standard that I maintain or expect out of our officers.
And it doesn't represent you.
No, not at all. But unfortunately it was tough. But, maintaining community trust, Jaafar, for a police department, it's very hard. You have to work at it every day, and you can very easily destroy it, right? So you have to work at it every day. It doesn't take much to destroy that level of trust or commitment that you've built over the years with your community.
Yeah. Typically people have different outlooks on police. One outlook is these are the protectors. These are we're here for them. The other part is we're scared of police.
Yeah.
I kind of told you that story of my sister getting pulled over and she starts crying because the police pulled her over and she was new to America back then.
Yeah.
She didn't know what to do. So she just called me crying hey, I got pulled over. I don't know what to do. She thought that she was in really big trouble. And it's just like a traffic thing.
Yeah. I think it's important that police officers understand that they're guardians, right? It's important that they have a guardian mindset, that they're here to safeguard the community, keep them safe, protect the community. That's why I'm so focused on doing my best to hire officers from the community that represent the community. I think, like I told you when I started, you have better outcomes. For me, I've had the good fortune of working here 27 years. There's very few places I can go where I don't run into folks that I have built relationships with over the course of my career. And I lived in this city for many years. My wife is from this community, born and raised. She's got 9 brothers and sisters, all from this community. Yeah, well, I told you she was Palestinian. So, alhamdulillah, and for me, it's been a wonderful experience. You talked about what this community means to me. It's family. Yeah, it's, like I said, Dearborn's a special place, and I'm very blessed that I had the opportunity to get hired and work here.
I'm curious to know one thing. You get appointed as police chief, correct?
Correct.
When you get into the office first day, where do you even start? You're just tasked with this very big responsibility, and you just out of just giving some examples, talking about trauma, you laid maybe 10 different things from home invasions to predators, to stealing, to shootings. You have all these issues. How is that first day like trying to, where am I going to start tackling?
Well, I had worked here for 24 years before I became the chief. And I had the opportunity to do a lot of things within the department. So I had worked in patrol. I had spent time in the investigative division and critical incident community support. I had really had the opportunity to do everything in the department. And so when I took over day one, I already kind of had a roadmap of things that were important to me that I wanted to do. Here's something that's really one of my kind of guiding lights when it comes to leading the department. There's something called procedural justice, right? It's the idea that when you're interacting externally with the community, that you give the community a voice, that you're transparent in the things that you do, that you're fair in your process, right? So the community understands the things that are happening. and that you work hand in hand with the community to develop the police department that you want to have. A lot of chiefs are very focused on that, building community trust, right, on that procedural justice component externally. One thing that I am keenly focused on, Jaafar, is those principles, employing them internally within the police department, right? So what does that mean? That means that my officers, their voice matters, that when we do things within the organization or we make changes, that they understand what we're doing, that if there's promotions or discipline, that they understand that process and that their voice is heard. That when somebody does something good, that they make sure that they get the credit for it, right? That the credit's not taken. Why are those principles so important internally? Is that I can't expect my officers to go out and build trustful relationships with the community if they don't feel trusted and supported within the organization. And I know just from my experience coming up through the police department that sometimes lots of chiefs lose focus on how important that internal component is. And I'm of the opinion those values externally are as important internally.
Okay. So you wanted to focus on the inside and then plant that seed very well on the inside, and then when the officers go out, they know that they're going to perform as best as they can because you made sure that environment is set for them inside of the police department.
I'm very focused on the internal culture and morale of the organization. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's happy, and that, I guarantee you could find folks that, would like to see some maybe things done differently. But my hope and expectation is that most of the officers would recognize that we do our best to try to maintain a positive internal culture where they feel supported and valued. Otherwise, this job we've already kind of outlined is so hard, gets even harder. Yeah.
You're in a weird position where in your job, compared to other jobs, if I make a mistake at my job, maybe one mistake is I didn't turn on the camera. The consequences, something like maybe the episode doesn't come out, whatever. In your job, sometimes mistakes means someone passes away.
Mistakes can mean people's lives.
Mistakes can mean people's lives. How do you handle that pressure of the people's lives are in my hands? And not just the people's lives. Like it's different when you were a sergeant, when you used to go out, let's say to these dope houses, you make a mistake. The mistake happens there. Now, even when the whole department makes a mistake, it all will come back to you.
So, yeah. When you talk about, being the chief and having a responsibility, I've got 200 officers out there that are doing this difficult job. And you're right, their mistakes are a representation, not only them, but me and the entire organization. And so that's why I'm never off, right? And, how do you try to mitigate some of that is through training, right? Through policies, through accountability, through oversight. And so, when you talk about a young officer getting redirected, right, because maybe they were driving way too fast to something that they shouldn't have been driving that fast to, or they didn't activate their lights or their sirens as they should have, right, to warn the public that they're coming.
Oh, so do police officers do get in trouble for that?
Of course.
Because a lot of times we would be driving and then this police officer would just zip right next to us, and we would always think, what if there is nothing really happening and he can just turn on his lights and he could just zoom through traffic and no one would know and no one can talk to him.
No. So, yeah. So no, that shouldn't happen. And if it does happen, they're held accountable, right? So, yeah, everything a police officer does, there is oversight and accountability.
Okay.
Like we know how fast their cars are going. We know when they activate their lights and their sirens, they have body cameras on them. And so, if I have an officer that's driving too fast to something that is not a priority, or he's driving his vehicle in an unsafe manner, they have to be redirected. Mm-hmm. That redirection could be a written warning, a reprimand, it could be a suspension, time off, and if it continues, it could ultimately lead to termination. And that happens, right? And so I have a responsibility to protect the officers from themselves, and sometimes that responsibility means protecting the public from them. Do you understand? And
right.
So it's a lot of responsibility. And so when you're redirecting officers and you're counseling them, sometimes that doesn't sit well with with cops. And so it's a challenge. Being a leader within a police department comes with a lot of responsibility. And, I encourage the supervisors within our organization, right? I empower them to make decisions. I expect them to, provide that oversight, mentoring, and accountability. But invariably, whenever you have an officer who's never made a mistake or done something wrong, oftentimes those critical mistakes, there's generally a supervisor that was there that could have maybe mitigated it.
Right.
So being a boss within the department comes with a lot of responsibility too.
So, aside from being chief, as an officer, if you make a mistake, and that means someone's life is lost, does that not get into your head and be like, am I even built for this job? Like, this person just lost their life because of me, or this person's in the hospital.
Jaafar, that mistake could lead to a police officer going to prison.
Mm.
That accountability, if a doctor makes a mistake, generally medical malpractice will pay out for that mistake. And depending on how egregious the mistake was, they continue being a doctor. Mistakes by police officers can oftentimes lead to police officers losing their profession, going to jail, losing their freedom. And maybe it's warranted, right? Maybe if the mistake is so egregious, that's what's necessary. But yeah, the stakes go beyond just the guilt of that mistake, but could lead to, them being incarcerated as well.
Really, even like I'm talking about maybe making it to the scene like 3 minutes too late. Like, does that, I wonder if the police officer would be like, man, if I just came here quicker, or if I took a different turn.
So those are two different scenarios.
Yeah.
Right? So a police officer maybe who was driving too fast, lost control of their car, and ended up hurting somebody could end up facing criminal prosecution, and the guilt of that, I'm sure, would weigh on them. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you outlined, just coming a little bit too late to a run, or had I intervened or done something different, or if I had recognized this call for help as being more serious than I originally thought it was. Yeah, for sure. That's just another.
Like, that does happen.
Of course. Of course. Police officers don't have crystal balls, and so they do their best to try to navigate and bring, everyone that, generally speaking, my assumption is that everybody that wears this uniform is here to try to help people, save people's lives.
Right.
And so when you fall short, I'm sure much like a doctor might, right? If somebody passes away, I'm sure that takes a toll on them as well. It does for cops too. Firefighters, any first responder, really.
I'm just thinking about how difficult, like, as this conversation keeps going, the more I realize, man, like, this is difficult.
It's a tough job.
Every aspect of your life, you just have like knives going in from every direction,
So if, so they call them actuarial rates, right? So like when a police officer retires, they figure out your pension or how long they might have to pay your pension. Well, the life expectancy for cops is much shorter than most of any other profession because it takes a toll, the stress on your heart, the trauma. So life expectancy for cops is not nearly as long as most other professions. And so there's obviously a science behind it.
Did you ever, anytime during your service, thought, I wish I didn't even get into this?
Sure. Yeah, there were times where I thought about, maybe doing something different.
Really?
Yeah.
What did you think you would have done other than?
I almost went to law school.
Okay.
Yeah, but the LSAT scared me, so I chickened out.
But also public service, like a lawyer, is a form of helping the public. And
yeah, unless you're a defense attorney.
Yeah.
Just joking. The world needs good defense attorneys too.
Something that also interests me is you were recognized recently because crime rate went down, and it went down a lot. Like, there's specific crimes where you saw drops of 30+%, and those are like robberies, home invasions.
Yeah.
Like, what happened, or what are the things that you implemented that made that switch from to get that 30% decrease?
Jaafar, I wish that I could stand here and take all the credit for the fact that we had those significant drops. I think there are a number of things that the city, that the mayor, that our police officers did to help get some of those reductions. But I think most police chiefs will tell you that they're not naive enough to take credit for all the reductions. Sometimes you might see reductions in certain categories based on many things that are out of your control. The economics, the unemployment rate, like when COVID happened, crime rates went down dramatically because stores were closed. So I think there's probably some environmental issues that led to those decreases, but there are a number of things that we did that I think were really successful. So I can tell you the city of Dearborn made a significant investment in license plate reading cameras. And so Dearborn has more license plate reading cameras across the city than almost any other community in the state of Michigan. And so what does that mean, right? That means that when there's a crime that occurs, let's say it's a red pickup truck, and someone says, hey, this red pickup truck just broke into the store or committed a robbery, we can isolate all red pickup trucks across the city to try to get a license plate. When there is a vehicle that's wanted, that's stolen, or wanted for something else, and it enters the city, all the police officers will get an alert in real time telling us where that vehicle is. And so the reality is that piece of technology in my career has probably been one of the most transformative pieces of technology. I mean, a lot has come and gone over 27 years. That was supposed to be the latest and greatest thing in police work. But I have to tell you, the LPRs are significant and have helped us out significantly when it comes to preventing crime and then apprehending suspects later. We've been able to use those license plate reading cameras to stop everything from reckless driving, even to take homicide suspects into custody. The drones. The drones are significant too. We've used the drones many times to help not only find lost kids or lost adults, but to also find suspects and people that may be hiding that we can't find because there's infrared cameras on the front of them. But ultimately, I think the biggest significant contributing factor to reducing crime was the work of the men and women of the police department. Their effort that they put in every day to keep this community safe, stopping vehicles that look, that are speeding or running stop signs, and then just being out there and visible to, prevent crime.
One of the most important aspects of our faith that we tend to focus on during this holy month is giving back. But a well-known issue in giving back is finding reputable sources to give them your money to. That's why Not From Here is partnering up with Zahra Trust. They were on the ground with cleanup, mental health assistance, and providing aid for the people in need. And they already did a lot of work in Lebanon. They were helping out during the whole duration of the war. But even after the war ended, a lot of people are still living through the consequences of that, and they need our help. And if you want to help out, and you want to donate, and you want to make sure that your money is getting to where it needs to be, there's a link in the description of this episode. It's a donation link through Zahra Trust. I hope God rewards all your efforts. And now, back to the episode. I didn't think about the technology part. Just a quick question on that. That means that even, like, for example, my car outside, that's taken a picture of and you have
So let's talk about what the technology does so that we don't scare the community, right? I want them to understand what it does, but more importantly, what it doesn't do. License plate reading camera, there's cameras all over.
Okay.
Right, first of all, not license plate reading cameras, surveillance cameras, Ring doorbells. But we have a number of cameras across the city that are stationary. So when your car drives by them, it takes just a snapshot of your license plate. So if you have a white pickup truck, it'll recognize it as a white pickup truck and take a picture of the plate. That's all that it's doing. 99.9% of the plates that are taken are in the system for 30 days and they drop off and nobody ever knows that it was there. But if there's a crime that's committed, or if your car is stolen and it's wanted and it goes by one of those 70 cameras across the city, it'll immediately alert all the officers that card just went through this intersection and is wanted for, armed robbery or is stolen. Because if you have a stolen car and you're driving around in it, you're probably up to no good.
Right.
You're either going to steal another car or commit another felony. So it's a great piece of technology that I'm glad the city's made the investment in. What it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you who's driving. It doesn't indiscriminately or discriminate vehicles or drivers or people. It has no idea. It's just simply a snapshot of that vehicle and that plate. And so I think it's important to know that so that people are comfortable driving on our roadways.
Do you ever look up like what other countries' police system has technology or no?
So no, I very much actually always look for best practices across the country, to try to take pieces of initiatives or technology or things that other communities have found successful to try to incorporate it here if I think it's going to help.
Yeah, so you are proactive in that.
Very proactive, yeah.
Okay.
I very much try to disrupt the system and try to do things that might be different. I very often want to be the first to do something rather than like follow the herd. And sometimes they work out great. But I think you also look, if everything that you try in life, Jaafar, works out, you're not working hard enough, right? Some things aren't going to work out, and that's okay. But you need to have enough humility to realize, like, okay, maybe this was my idea. Maybe it didn't work out the way I wanted to, but that's okay. Let's change gears. But I very much like to be outside the box, trying to try new things. Whether it was the partnership with Access, for substance abuse issues. Like I said, we were one of the first in the state. That was an example of me. I recognized that we have a serious problem. And I remember when I started the program, that it was a significant increase in deaths at that point. And so I thought to myself, like, we've got to be able to do something different. Like we would show up at an overdose, Jaafar. We would hold the door open for the fire department. They would provide life-saving interventions, take people to the hospital. We'd close the door, write a report. We'd go on to the next run. And I thought, like, we've got to be able to do more here. Like, this isn't enough. And so I'm very proud of that program. I mean, we've been able to get hundreds of people enrolled since we've had it for many years now into treatment programs that otherwise wouldn't have been in treatment.
One thing that I seen you done that I wanted to ask you about was a religious chaplain.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So we've had a chaplain program for many years, well before I became chief. And so we have denominations, everything from Sunni to Shia to we have a rabbi, we have priests and other clergy. And so they provide comfort for our department, for our officers, if we should do another way when we talk about dealing with trauma, but then also for the community. And so if we have to make a death notification because someone's lost their life and we have to make that, terrible notification at someone's home, very often we lean on our chaplains and we bring them with us when we have to deliver that terrible news. So they're there for our spiritual needs and to comfort the community as well.
Is it difficult calling someone and telling them that there's a passing?
Yeah, of course.
Because there's this way of being like, hey, this is the police department, we would like to inform you, and you can say it in a very monotone, professional way, and maybe that way you could just close the call and be like, I told them, I'm fine. But then there's the humanitarian part of it where if the mom picks up, you're gonna want to comfort her. So how does that kind of go?
I mean, Jaafar, telling anybody that they've lost a loved one is just incredibly traumatic for that family. And, for me, it takes a little piece of me every time it happens, too.
Is it your job to do it?
No, it depends if I happen to be there. I've done it as the chief and I've done it as an officer. But sometimes it can be up to the officer. It can be up to the supervisor that's working. Generally, we have a supervisor do that. But yeah, I mean, that's nothing you want to ever tell someone that they've lost their loved one. I can tell you that you don't mince words, right? You're fairly direct about it so that there's no misunderstanding. But yeah, it's incredibly traumatic.
Mince words, like you wouldn't tell them your son passed away. You'd be like, your son was in a little trouble.
No, yeah, I mean, I'm
that
sorry to inform you, but your daughter has passed away and she's died. You know what I mean? You don't, because if we've lost her, or you want it to be clear what's happened. But it's terrible.
What's the follow up to that usually?
To something like that?
Yeah, like what does the person on the other side say?
I mean,
or don't
say. When you've told someone that they've lost their loved one?
Yes.
I mean, their whole world, as you imagine, Jaafar, their whole world just, is just falling apart.
There's that weird moment of silence.
For some people, there's no silence. It's different for everybody. Yeah. Some people scream and some people but I mean, I don't know. It's traumatic and it's a terrible moment in their lives. The thing I think it's important for police officers to remember, and I kind of always talk about it with our young officers, is that because of the work that we do, right, you might deal with 10 or 12 calls for service, 15, 20 calls for service that day. What do I mean by that? A call for service, 20 people have called the police. Someone's car's got broken into, someone has gotten hurt, someone's been the victim of a robbery. And for you, those types of interactions can become fairly routine, right? You go to the scene of a DOA, someone's had a heart attack, and so for you, they can become routine. But I assure you, for the person that you're dealing with, this interaction that they're having with you, they will remember every minute detail. They'll remember what you said. They'll remember how you behaved. They'll remember if you laughed. They'll remember that interaction to the T. And so it's important that police officers remember that, right? Because for you, what become routine over the course of your day and years in this profession, for that person you're dealing with, it'll probably be maybe the only time they deal with a Dearborn police officer in their entire life. And they will frame that interaction and that experience to form their opinions of the organization and law enforcement as a whole across the country. And that's a lot to deal with. And when you think about
a lot of pressure for that one
moment.
moment.
Every day for that cop, right? Because you have to always kind of make sure that you are conducting yourself with professionalism and excellence. Otherwise, you can fall short.
Other than the technology and the leadership that's in the police department. What are things that residents can do that can help you decrease the crime rate even more?
So you want to know what they can start? They can always lock their car doors. The most common crime in any community is going to be what they call larceny from auto, meaning that someone has gone and broken into your car when you've left it generally unattended, either in your driveway, in the street, in the parking lot. And so we were able to make a significant reduction in that category, but there was one point in my career where over 700 times a year that happened. I think we're right around the 300 mark this year. But if I was to tell you, out of that 300 and some vehicles that had their cars broken into, what percentage of them do you think are unlocked?
Unlocked, I would say maybe 40.
No, it's more like 90%. And people will leave laptops, they'll leave jewelry, they'll leave guns unsecured in unlocked vehicles, and they get stolen. So the biggest thing that people can do is lock their car doors, take their belongings, put them out of sight, lock their doors to their home.
So it's pretty difficult.
Locking the car doors is the number one thing, man. But I say all this, and I myself have been the victim of it because, life gets in the way. Your kids are screaming. You forget to hit the button, and sure enough, that was the night. But if you think about it, if you're that person that generally locks your car door, and one or two times you left it unlocked, you've gotten it broken into, just ask yourself how many times someone pulled on your door handle and your car door was locked, and they moved on to the other car. So 90% of them are left unlocked. So they're pulling on a lot of door handles that are locked, and they're not the victim.
So it's that simple to them. Like, they won't try harder to get into your car. If it's locked, it's locked. They just keep moving.
I've seen surveillance video of guys that are hanging out of car windows, driving down the street, pulling on door handles. They don't even get out of the car. So lock your car doors. Other things you can do, install surveillance cameras. Be mindful. Close your garage doors. Just be mindful of your surroundings. Keep your belongings out of sight. Surveillance cameras, lighting is helpful. Trim back your bushes. Don't make your space inviting. Those kinds of things.
Wow. And you think, you just said 90%. So basically, if all cars were locked, you probably get just a few of them this past year.
There was a program, and when I was a captain, that I brought to Dearborn because I had seen it in a neighboring jurisdiction. It was called Lock It or Lose It. I don't know, people that have lived in this town long enough or be familiar with it. And so the Lock It or Lose It program, we had billboards that were sponsored by business owners, and we had billboards across the city. We had handouts and flyers, and it was all centered around the idea of lock your car doors and put your belongings out of sight. And people got tired, I think, of the messaging because we hammered down on it for over 3 years. But we were able to reduce the number of cars that got broken into in half. So when I talked about having over 700 larcenies from autos, that was at the height of it when we initiated that program, and we were able to, over the course of 3 years, cut it in half. So I know people probably got tired of it, but the reality is it works.
Yeah. Now, first, this is just something quick to address.
Sure.
Well, I saw something online that said that you would want to retire soon. That you are retiring soon.
No. So I've been eligible to retire for a couple of years. I'm going to try to hold on a few more years, but it has a shelf life. I'll tell you, Jaafar, if I had one of my biggest regrets, I never turned down overtime when I was coming up through the ranks. I never turned down a special assignment, and I never turned down a promotion. And so I was very ambitious, and I worked really hard. And I had this goal early on in my career that one day I wanted to be the chief. But that came with sacrifice, like I talked about. It was sacrifice with time with my kids. It was sacrifice with time with my family. And now that I've become the chief, we talked about kind of what I didn't realize until I became chief. You don't realize the commitment that it takes to do this job successfully and the sacrifice that it takes to be available to everyone all the time. And so all of that sacrifice has been at the expense of my family. And so while I love being the chief, and it's one of my greatest honors in life, it has a shelf life. And at some point I will retire. And I want to be able to retire on, in good health, like I talked about, physical and mental, and enjoy, what life God has left for me. But the older you get, you kind of realize, like, how many birthdays do I have left, And if God gives me enough of those birthdays. I want to try to enjoy some of those, and I'm not the chief. So at some point, inshallah, I'll retire. But I want to hold on for a couple more years.
You think that all those, I'll take that special assignment, give me the overtime, eventually led to your detriment?
Yeah, if I could have done things over, I would have paced myself a little bit differently. Yeah, I really would. I have lots of officers that I will, that I see a lot of promise in. I'll say, hey, why don't you test to be a sergeant? And they'll say, chief, my kids got soccer in the evenings and baseball, and I coach that, and I can't the schedule. And I'm a little envious of that because it didn't compute for me when I was in their stage of my life. And now I look at my 19 and 20-year-old, and I ask myself where the years went, man. You can't get those years back. So at some point I'll get off the train and try to enjoy some of the time I have left with my family.
And years move fast for you.
And the older you get, the faster they move. My mom used to always say that.
Interesting.
It's oh my God, the older you get, Jaafar, they're going to blow by.
Really?
Oh yeah. So life is short, man. And only Allah knows how much time we have left. And so I want to be able to enjoy some of that time with my family.
You definitely should.
Yeah.
I think it's overdue, maybe.
Yeah. This career's been great to me, and I've had a wonderful career. And like I told you, man, the honor and privilege of being able to serve this community, the love that I get from this community, it warms my heart.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't trade it for anything, but at some point, you got to move on.
You mentioned that the pay, at best, you'll be middle class. You're going to go through traumatic situations. You're going to see your friends die. Very demanding job. You're working 24/7. Why would anyone in their right mind want to be a police officer?
I think for me, when I recruit officers, Jaafar, I try to find officers that this is a calling for them, right? That this is a passion for them. That this is something that, like I told you, I was an explorer when I was 14 years old. Right? I was a kid, and I thought to myself, this is what I want to do. Why do I try to find those young adults that this is their passion? Because they tend to, in my opinion, they're the most successful because it is such a challenging, tough job. When you find somebody who got laid off from Ford Motor Company and they're like, need a job, this generally, from my perspective, and it's not always the rule, but they don't have the grit to kind of drive through all the challenges that you see. So for me, it's got to be a calling and a passion for someone. I think, but to your point, I don't think a lot of rational people would sign up to be cops because it's such a tough job.
Yeah.
But I also want to temper that. It's one of the most honorable professions that you can find. The ability to help people in their darkest hour. For me, that brings me a lot of satisfaction. When people need you the most, you're able to be there and to be able to bring them and keep them safe, to protect them, to be able to protect the community, to be able to remove violent people off the street that don't belong to be on the street because they mean to cause harm to others. So that level of being able to be that protector for people, for me, has brought me a lot of satisfaction. But yeah, it's a challenging, tough job.
There's a sentence you told me last time we sat about police officers and purpose.
Yeah, that's thanks for reminding me of that. I think a lot of people go through life and they ask themselves if they've made a difference in this world. Well, cops don't have that problem, right? They recognize that they've helped people. When you're going to spend 25 years or plus more of your life in a profession, it's nice to know that you've made it better for other people. You've made it a better world for others. And, in Dearborn, we have the ability to do that for folks in the city.
Especially a lot, you're probably very busy, and I don't know how much you get to consume social media online, but there's a lot of gurus out there that talk about purpose and what you should do in life, and it seems like it's always a struggle for a lot of people. I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know how I'm supposed to serve. When you said that last time, that made me think that through all that difficulty, the one consistent factor is Issa Shahin knows what his purpose was in this world, and is to make people's lives better.
Yeah. I would agree with that. You have to be a servant to be a cop. You have to have a servant mindset. So the idea of public servant, it's very true. You know, if you've gotten into this job to drive fast and, you know, write tickets or arrest bad guys, then you might not be you're in the wrong job. It's really to help people, you know.
What does money mean to you?
I've never really been motivated by money. You know what I mean? Like for me, I don't wear jewelry. I don't wear a watch. I don't wear necklaces. When I retire, I'm going to get in my Honda Fit, a 2013 Honda Fit, and drive home. Like, so, yeah, money's never really been my motivating factor. It's just, you know, it's a tool that you need to be able to feed yourself and put a roof over your head.
Do you wish more people had that mentality about money?
Yeah, I think it'd be a better world, man. I mean, so many people are focused on, you know, put certain designer bags and watches and clothes, and that's never been my thing. For me, you know what's motivated me? I like experiences, and so while I've worked really hard and I was always at work when I could take vacations, I took my kids and families on meaningful vacations and trips overseas, across the country to build experiences. So experiences for me are worth a lot more than just jewelry and personal belongings. It's never been my thing.
Chief, what's one thing that we didn't talk about today that you think we should have?
You know what I think would be something that's really, for me, I think kind of a big deal that the department was really important of the department is we changed our policing model, right? When I first took over, we had a policing model before I took over that was focused on high visibility traffic enforcement. And so officers used to stop folks for low level offenses like dangling ornaments and, you know, tail lights that were out, in the effort to try to stop crime before it happened. And so, you know, when you tell a lot of young officers to go out there and police that model, you can have outcomes that are not necessarily good outcomes. So when we had that policing model before I took over, and so 40% of the people we used to pull over were people of color or African American. And so, you know, nobody's ever called my office, Jaafar, and said, you know, I've got all these dangling ornaments in my neighborhood. I want you to do something about it. And so it didn't make sense to me that we would be focused on pulling people over for those kinds of things. So when I became chief, I was actually one of my first weeks as chief, I went into all the roll calls. I said, guys, I want you focused on what matters to residents. I want you in the neighborhood stopping people for running stop signs and speeding and going through red lights and reckless driving. I want you focused on the violations like that, hazardous moving violations. And so we got back in the neighborhoods and we started stopping people for those kinds of offenses. And what we found is we're focused on the things that matter to residents, but we also cut the number of people being pulled over, people of color pulled over in half. We went from 40% to roughly 20%. And so, you know, we're policing in a more equitable way. We're making our roads safer, and we're making sure that we're not targeting any one individual, right? Because I don't care what your zip code is, your race, your religion, but everybody should know that they're going to be treated the same no matter where they come from.
What makes one part of town safer than the other? Like, just for example, in Dearborn, people might say like East Dearborn is less safe than West. So where does that kind of come from?
Let me ask you this. What do you think is the safest part of the city? We got the northeast end, the west end, the south end.
West, I would say.
Okay, the safest part of this city that has the least amount of crime is actually the south end of Dearborn. Really? Yeah. We have the fewest amount of crimes, and serious crimes have traditionally always been in the south end. They have the lowest crime rates really across the city.
Interesting. Why is that?
I think a lot of it has to do with its geographic makeup, right? So there's not a lot of ways into the south end, right? So you don't get a lot of transient community, traffic that goes through the south end. I also think that those neighborhoods down there, they know their neighbors, right? They're very engaged. They know when something looks out of place, and they don't hesitate to call the police. And we have a strong presence in the south end. You generally have 1 to 2 cars at minimum in the south end at all times. So, but yeah, so I think you were asking what some of the higher crime areas are. I mean, I don't think conventional wisdom holds up here, right? Because you thought the West End might be the safest.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't matter, like that conversation is not really valid.
No, I mean, we have crimes happen kind of all over the city. There's no one part of the city that's, that can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Chief, I'm really looking forward for the rest of the years you have in service, and I look forward to sitting with you here again. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me, Jaafar.
Of course.